Some hard acts to follow there. Well, thank you so much. Extremely excited to be here. It's been a phenomenal experience over the last 4 years working with Orreco, and I'm delighted now to be on the other side of things and be part of the actual Orreco team. So thanks, Brian, and the Orreco guys for all the support. Thanks, Forrest, for the introduction. I don't need to speak too much about my current situation and what I'm doing now, but today's presentation, I'm going to be looking at the current rookie process in the NBA, the challenges that these players face, and maybe looking at some of the ways that we can improve or prevent these challenges from occurring, and then look at some future interventions and ways to deal with these challenges as we move forward. So there's a lot of hype in the media surrounding the injuries that occur within the rookie's first season within the NBA. It's an issue over the years that's been identified, and there's lots of suggestions as to why this is occurring, but I would like to take you through why I believe this actually occurs. So if we look at the rookie process, the rookie is just somebody who's come straight out of college, the first season in the league, and it's quite an extensive process. They go through the college season, which is usually around 5 months maximum in length, and from there they go straight into a combine preparation, and that usually lasts for at least a month before the draft itself comes about. So within the combine they have multiple teams there looking at them, assessing their medical situation, assessing their current skill sets, and then the teams then decide which players they want to invite to the training facility. And then in the month of June, the players then go to the training facility of various different teams where they are exposed to a number of different workouts. And during this time, it's very intense. They go from team to team. There's a lot of intense training. Each team does different types of training sessions with them, and there's like an accumulation of training. And then from there, they go straight into a pre-season. They go into the summer league after they've been selected through the draft. They go to the summer league with the various teams, again into more intense playing and training with the teams, their individual teams that they're with. And then after that, summer league competition, where the coaches identify where those players are going to fit into the team for the following season. They have a short break, but then they're straight into pre-season training, and then they go into camp. And then camp is usually a high volume of training. It's sometimes 2 to 3 times more than the chronic average, and they are exposed to extreme volumes of load. And then within that, they go straight into pre-season games, and then from pre-season games, the season starts. Now, usually the top rookies, they are often starting with the team. They get high minutes to start with, and as the season goes on, the form is inconsistent. It's usually not at the level that's expected, and often injuries are sustained. And then around the All-Star break, you often see the form really dramatically start to decrease. Illnesses and injuries occur, and then following on after that All-Star break, which is around February, March time within the season, the players may not feature that much again. Now, one of the reasons I believe that is obviously, aside from all the build-up and emotional stress to get to the season that the rookie faces, is the actual difference within the NBA season to the rookie season. Obviously, within the NBA, you have longer games. The actual process of the game is nearly an hour longer than a college game. The length of the season is 7 to 8 months, whereas a college season is 4 to 5 months, which is a huge step up. NBA season is 90-plus games, whereas a college season is 35 games, so nearly 3 times more the amount of games that the players are being exposed to. average games a week, sometimes 4 to 5 games, often multiple cities per week, whereas college games only a couple of games a week, so lots more time to adapt, to recover from the stresses of the game. And then there's back-to-backs in the NBA. Less back-to-backs now because they've modified the schedule, but there's still back-to-backs that the players are exposed to, whereas before they aren't exposed to these. And then it really does take its toll. Some of the other challenges that they face, training is often not individualized. It's very hard to get baselines on these players, to understand where the reference is and how to incrementally load them to progress the training. Physical fitness is often separate from actual basketball training, so they have a lot of additional training. There's a lack of basketball conditioning specifically, so it's quite antiquated in that approach. The volume often outweighs the intensity. As I discussed before, camp is a huge amount of volume that they're exposed to versus actual basketball-specific training, which is high-intensity, explosive bursts of actions. And it's very challenging for us to track, or people working in basketball, to track all types of the load that they're exposed to. There's lots of individual sessions that the rookies are exposed to because they're straight into the league. The coaches want to get their hands on them, work with them, develop them. So to track every session that the player is doing is very challenging because it's very varied and they're exposed to lots of different coaches within that time. And then younger players are always expected to do more. They're younger, they're fresher, they're healthier, so we should be doing more with them. But often in other cultures it's seen differently. Lots of other sports, they provide more of an adjustment period for them to adapt to the sport. I know Aussie rules, for example, gives an acclimatization period within the first few years within the rookie players coming into that sport. In the NBA, from a financial perspective, the rookie contracts are staggered, so they start off with lower amounts and financially it increases incrementally, but that isn't obviously the case in terms of what they're exposed to from a training and playing perspective. Other challenges that they face, obviously, with the amount of travel, as we've heard, it really impacts recovery. The amount of flights, travel is very detrimental to hormone responses, recovery, strength. There's lots of good research to suggest that. Multiple time zones are frequently crossed by these guys now, whereas before they weren't doing that. So that really affects the circadian rhythms, their ability to get quality recovery. Often they are exposed to late nights from back-to-back travel, flying from different cities, so they will arrive at destinations at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and expect to play the next day. So that in itself really reduces their recovery. And then the emotional load going into the NBA, now the small fish in the big pond, they are exposed to a lot more variations in the stress from an emotional perspective. They have to do rookie responsibilities. The vets see them as sometimes in different roles and that have different demands on these players, which can all take its toll from an emotional perspective, and that in itself can affect their ability to recover. So I really believe that this affects their level of fatigue massively. This accumulation of load in all the different areas really affects fatigue. And in my experience, fatigue is often confused with lack of fitness. So unfortunately, what often happens is when somebody's seen as being fatigued, they work harder, and then from an acute stage of fatigue where they've had an overload experience, that then goes into the accumulation of fatigue, which we recognize with Orreco as that R2P ready to perform 3 to 4 stage, and then that becomes more of a chronic level of fatigue, and that starts to become expressed in how they move, the quality of the actions that they're producing, the way that they are performing reduces over time. You start to see tissue changes. Obviously, there's changes hormonally, there's changes from a physiological and neurological perspective, and that's when you start to see injuries occur. In an ideal scenario, optimal overload is incremental. In my experience, you start the season with a baseline, you understand what that baseline is, and then you incrementally increase that load over a period of time, so you have the highest amount of load at the end of the season, and you are at your freshest at the end of the season, going into the time when you need to peak, as opposed to traditionally the highest amount of load is at the start of the season, and then that impacts the team, in my opinion, negatively to start the season, especially in the NBA. So ideally, progressive overload and optimal recovery will ideally maximize performance. Now, in my opinion, what optimal recovery is as some of the great presentations earlier described, it's a accumulation of ideal rest. So sleep is essential, nutrition, hydration, emotional well-being. All these provide ideal levels for recovery, which drives wellness. And when you feel well, when you're good, you are ideally fresh. And when you're fresh, that allows you to perform optimally, to train, to adapt, and then the cycle continues. And if you incrementally increase that load over a period of time, you'll have a great cycle of rest, recovery, and adaptation. Is this possible in the NBA? And is it possible to prevent fatigue in the NBA with all these extremes of loading and all the challenges that they're faced with, the travel, with the schedule, etc.? And I do believe it is, and I think that is by better overload and better recovery strategies. And I think in the future, what we'll see with our rookies is that as they come into the league, they will have more of an adjustment period going into the league. They'll have more time to adapt. They'll probably play less frequently as the season goes on. They will have time to adjust to the season, and then they will just grow stronger, adjust, and as the All-Star break comes upon them, after that period, they will even grow stronger, and they'll finish in a good place at the end of the season as opposed to being in a fatigued or injured state. How are we going to do this? Well, I think continuous microsensor monitoring. There's various ways of monitoring athletes right now. Obviously, there's many issues with how this is carried out, and it can be very challenging to get player buy-in at times to wear these and to get baseline data from everything that they're doing. As I discussed before, it's a challenge, but I believe in the future that we'll be able to apply sensors that are convenient for the athlete to wear, that are on 24 hours a day, that provide insight in terms of all the loads at every location that they are being exposed to. In the NBA, obviously, they're playing and training, and you cannot collect data during games, or the data that's collected during games is different from the data that's collected during practice, which is different from the data from stadium to stadium. So it's a challenge collecting that information, but if in the future I believe that there'll be sensors that we can use that can provide information on a continuous basis, that give information on the baselines of training, what the nervous system status is, what the sleep quality and quantity is, and then we can provide interventions and make better decisions on what those players are able to do on a daily basis. One of the challenges is being able to make decisions on the day of an event. And in the NBA, it's so fast-paced, being able to provide the coaching staff the information that makes sense to them, that's relevant for them to make a decision to change training or to provide them with a decision that allows that player to stay in a fresh state rather than start to drop into that fatigue state is essential. I also believe that in the future we'll be able to capture practices through real-time data analysis, through markerless motion analysis, and the ability to capture forces that are generated in practice with sensors in sneakers or trainers that give us more of an insight in terms of the forces that the players are producing. We'll then be able to see whether the forces are changing, what forces are produced, what the specificity for that individual is in terms of developing them and what the development programs are, being able to look at movement risk patterns, how those players are moving when they are playing in real time, and then how we can identify quickly when those players are moving into certain postures or positions or movements that are relevant to injury risk. We'll be able to look at reaction speeds within real time, so how the players are reacting to certain situations and plays within practice, and if those reactions are changing or dropping off or reducing, then we'll be able to modify and monitor and make interventions immediately through that aggregation of information that will come through into IBM Watson, and Watson will give those interventions, and then that will be detailed to the coach, and the coach will then have an easy way to understand what he should do to modify his practice or to create a practice that is helpful to the freshness of that player, but also allows him to get across the things that he needs to do within that practice. I also see the future providing a better way of wellness monitoring. Obviously, wellness is essential for providing optimal recovery. Your emotional responses obviously trigger your physiological responses. So having a level of wellness and being able to monitor that with facial recognition through your phone, being able to identify those emotional responses, and also the language that you use and the intonations through your voice will enable the future interventions to be applied based off of what that emotional status is. Social media interactions, obviously social media is huge nowadays. There's a lot of athletes that are interacting constantly. The language that they use, the posts that they put out there, being able to track that and utilize that as a way to identify the mood that those players are in will be very useful too. This will feed into the mainframe, the data aggregation, and then through the future, I also believe there will be something called the readiness chair. Now, collecting this information is one of the challenges in sport, but having a readiness chair will be able to create more efficiency for the athlete. So often one of the reasons you don't get buy-in with a lot of sports science is because of the challenges of being able to do this efficiently with the athlete consistently, being able to get them to give that time, word the tech. But if there's a chair that they can come in, they sit in first thing in the morning, and it provides biomarker analysis, looks at the heart rate variability so you can see the level of nervous system status, muscle glycogen stores in terms of what they need from a nutritional perspective and hydration perspective, and then also looking at tissue integrity, so whether there's tissue changes in the body based off of those responses to load, what those tissue changes are, is there any inflammation within the system, what areas are inflamed. So having a chair that provides all these facilities, which are close to being there right now, but being able to pull them all together in one spot and to be able to execute them rapidly to provide those data points and that information that's aggregated to then provide an overall status of readiness that will direct training for that day will be immensely helpful. I also see the future in terms of travel being a lot easier on the athlete in terms of how the athletes travel with the type of plane. The planes will be obviously far faster and be able to get to those destinations quicker. And within the plane, they'll also have that readiness chair that I spoke about, but also a recovery pod. So a pod that you can lie in or sleep in that provides a better environment for that player to recover. It takes away the detriments of that altitude that we know are negative effects to performance and recovery. So a place for them to recover and sleep and get better regeneration from travel. I also see the future in terms of therapeutic modalities. When an issue is identified through the readiness chair or through the identification of some of the scanning through the readiness chair, the targeted areas will be treated with wireless cooling or heating devices that can be applied in certain areas of the body that do not need wires, and they can be controlled remotely from various destinations. And there are devices that I've seen that are similar to this coming out, which are exciting. But the goal for me is to, and for the future, is to stop that fatigue or that accumulation of fatigue from occurring. So if we can modify the way that the players are overloaded and have better plans in place in terms of their recovery, identify what's slowing their recovery down and put interventions in that are actionable on a daily basis, we can really reduce the accumulation of fatigue. We can provide better recovery strategies and allow them to stay fresher for longer, prolong their career, provide them with the right tools to stay fresh and fit throughout the season. I believe that in the future, accumulation of fatigue and chronic fatigue are going to be a thing of the past. The game is in the NBA is definitely getting faster. There's more athletic players are being selected now. I think one of the goals of a lot of teams in terms of the recruitment process is they want to select athletic players. It's not that we're evolving, I believe, in terms of becoming more athletic. It's just that we're selecting more athletic players. More players are explosive, can produce more power. These type of players produce more muscle damage, in my experience. So more muscle damage needs more recovery time. And you can only understand that by effective monitoring and analysis and data collection and then individualization. We know that health provides success, and the healthiest teams in the NBA last season, as this chart shows, were the most successful. So it's important to have a healthy team for success. But and I'm often hearing in the media and athletes saying and coaches saying, if only we could stay healthy, we've got a great chance to win. Well, hopefully with these interventions and the way that we can really apply these interventions and be individualized with what we're doing in the future, we won't need to worry about health being a factor, and it will be about skill execution, tactical and technical execution of the athlete. I believe that individualization is the key to giving every athlete the chance to succeed. Often only the robust athletes succeed right now. For instance, the Rookie of the Year last year, Karl Anthony Towns, 7 foot, 244 pounds. He can really cope with the loads that he's exposed to. He is genetically gifted, but there's a lot of other people that are maybe not as gifted physically or need more or different types of training or whatever it is from an individual perspective to allow them to get the best out of their skill set. And I think that is all about individualization and how we apply these interventions effectively. Thank you.